Hi. Before I really talk about we are worthy, I suppose we ought to sort of think a little bit about why we might consider we are not worthy. However, before I even do that, I just want to say if you hear some mutterings of frustration, etc., in the background, it's because Andrew is currently doing some research and he's struggling with Windows 10 and the internet at the moment, so I apologise for any distractions. Anyway, getting back to the main issue here. We are worthy. Well, I want to sort of explore, as I say, why we might feel otherwise initially. And I've already written about the sort of more very personal, tangible aspects of this in terms of the fact that unresolved infertility or other reasons for not having children that we long for can affect your self-confidence, etc. So I'm now going to go sort of slightly a bigger picture, if you like. So one of the challenges that we face is that we live in a very child-centric world. Think about books, television, films, newspapers, advertising. Absolutely everything seems to be focused on the importance of having children and selling that sort of that ideal world, that myth of the fact that happiness involves or includes having children. And even when some magazines and newspapers, etc., talk about the challenges surrounding perhaps infertility and are talking about infertility struggles, etc., the majority of the time they end up on a positive note. So people believe that these struggles always end up with a miracle baby. And in fact, I got very frustrated during National Infertility Awareness Week in April of this year, because there was an article talking about 13 celebrities and their struggle with infertility. And when I looked through that article and dug a little deeper, every single one of those people mentioned had gone on to have either their own biological children through the help of IVF or surrogacy, or they had gone on to adopt. So something which was talking about the struggles of infertility was still selling the myth that infertility results in a miracle baby. And I think that's because the media doesn't want to have the sad stories at the end, because they're talking to a child-centric world where children are everything. So that can be really frustrating, and it can seem like a very hostile world that we live in because of that. And unfortunately, I don't think that attitudes are going to change very quickly to this, particularly because we have governments who are very pro-natalist in their attitude. And what I mean by that is that they proactively have laws which promote parenthood. So people get tax breaks or other incentives, etc., to have children. And the reason why they do this is because governments are terrified about the negative impact that a falling birth rate can have on the future of the country. And unfortunately, concepts and ideas and attitudes often filter down. So if you think of the government, if you like, as being almost the head of a country, then if they have got pro-natalist attitudes, that is going to filter down through society. So I think we're going to have an uphill struggle on that one. So when you take all of that into account, plus our own feelings of inadequacy perhaps, and our battered self-confidence, the fact that our mojo has disappeared. I mean, for a long time, mine packed its bags and went to Australia. It's coming back. It's somewhere mid-Atlantic, I think, at the moment, so it's getting ever nearer to me. But it's, it's little wonder that because of all of these things, that we do feel like second-class citizens, and the world often treats us like that. We feel that our concerns, our needs aren't considered at all. And if they are considered, they are certainly not as high a priority as people who are parents. We feel marginalised, isolated. We feel that we don't have a voice at all. Or if we do have a small voice, that voice is often totally drowned out by the voices of the collective parents of the world. So it is little wonder that we often feel that we are worthless. However, we're not worthless. We are of incredible value to the world. And so that we're moving on to a more sort of positive feel to this video, I'm now going to start exploring that. One of the comments which really annoys me is that parents have a more vested interest in the future because they've got children. And that really bugs me actually, because I do have an interest in the future. I have an interest in the future and I care about the future of this planet. And as a little bit of an example, I want to do a comparison between the general household rubbish that Andrew and I produce and the household rubbish produced by a friend of ours who has a child. So Andrew and I are two adults, and on average, we fill one small wheelie bin full of rubbish to go to a land refill site in 6 weeks. It takes us 6 weeks to fill that. Now, we do fill our recycling rubbish bin a lot faster than that. And you can see that in the photograph here, the sizes we're talking about, the yellow topped wheelie bin, which is bigger, is our recycling bin, and that smaller one next door to it gets filled up and emptied every 6 weeks on average. Now, in comparison, we've got a girlfriend who has a young daughter. So again, 2 people in the household, 1 adult, 1 child this time. And this girlfriend puts her wheelie bin out every 2 weeks, the general rubbish one. And that wheelie bin is the size of our big recycling bin. And in 2 weeks, my girlfriend and her daughter fill that up, sometimes to overflowing, every 2 weeks. She does recycle as well. However, I'm doing this, or Andrew and I are doing this, because we care for the planet full stop, and we're trying to do our bit. We're not doing this because we're in a selfish way, if you like, just to help the planet because we've got children. So who's more worthy? Who cares more about the future of the planet? Not sure about that one. Another comment which annoys me when people are sort of comparing somebody who's got children with somebody who hasn't got children is the one about you really don't know what love is all about until you have a child. Because for me, that really devalues and dismisses the love that a couple who have been married for, let's say, 60 years and have never spent a day away from each other during those 60 years. They have probably never had sex with another person. They may even not have really kissed properly another person. And after 60 years worth of marriage, they still look at each other in total adoration and love and respect. They walk down the street holding hands. And to say that though that couple's love is of less value and importance than the love that a parent has for a child, I think is wrong. And also, what about the parents who don't love their children? How worthy is that? So now I want to talk about some people who are worthy, even though they have not had children. I'm going to start off with sort of, general groups of people. You've got teachers who inspire others to greatness. one day, who knows, the person who finds the cure for the common cold or cancer may well have been inspired to follow a career in medical research by a teacher who doesn't have children for whatever reason. You've got the surgeons who save lives. Not all of those people are going to have children. You've got perhaps a diplomat who helps to bring peace to a region which has had long-term conflict. You've got perhaps aid workers who go and offer relief to people in the aftermath of natural disasters, or perhaps through man-made war. And many of those people who do immensely amazing and beneficial work are people who have not had children. Now, I want to cover two people in a little bit more detail, because I really respect these people and admire them. And the first person I want to talk about is Queen Elizabeth I of England. Now, she was childless by circumstance. Now, it was choice that she didn't have children. I know that because she chose not to marry. However, I believe that it still counts as childless not by circumstance when you consider what her reasons for not marrying were. So Queen Elizabeth I was growing up in a culture where women were not considered to be capable basically of doing anything apart from perhaps running a home and producing children and looking after those children. And as a member of the aristocracy, she would have been groomed to know that her main role in life was to produce an heir for her future husband. That is what women did, particularly in the aristocracy. And she fought very hard to become queen. And she was living in a culture whereby queens were considered to be incapable of ruling a country. And the law in England at the time was that if you were a queen by birth, as she was, and married, then you would become sort of the consort. You would still be called queen, but basically your husband would become king. And she decided that it was far more important for her to fulfill her role and her duty as the Queen of England, rather than allowing her power, her vision, whatever you want to call it, to be taken away from her by marrying. And this was particularly sort of the case in terms of any thoughts of marrying the King of Spain, because of course then that would mean that the religion in England would go back to Catholicism, and Queen Elizabeth I was very strong in her opinion that it had to be a Protestant country. So I believe that she was really childless by circumstance, or not by choice. And the pressure that she must have been under for years and years and years to get married and secure the succession, which is a duty of a monarch, must have been phenomenal. And I believe that Queen Elizabeth I wasn't only one of the UK's most formidable and amazing queens. I believe that she ranks very high up in the queens of the world as well. And she most certainly was worthy. Not perfect, but worthy. The second individual I want to talk about, who is a very worthy person, even though they haven't had children, is Jane Austen. Now, she most certainly is childless, not by choice, because unfortunately she died before she really had the chance to have children. I think there had been somebody that she fell in love with. There might have been a marriage proposal on the cards, and yet it never actually happened. And then as time progressed, she realised that it wasn't going to happen, and she had to come to terms with this. And then she died at a young age, when in theory she really could have gone on and had a marriage and children. And Jane Austen has had a huge impact on the world, positive impact on the world. Whilst it might not have been the most popular book while she was alive, Pride and Prejudice now is hugely popular. In fact, it ranks 13th in the most popular book of the world of all time. 13th. It might not be the bestseller book or best-selling book in the world. However, it's one of the most popular books in the world. And it has sold over 20 million copies in the last 200 years. And that's a phenomenal amount. Now, one of the reasons why it's the most popular book, I'm sure, is that has something to do with all of the television programs, adaptations, and films that have been done of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Yeah, who can forget the lovely Colin Firth walking out of that pond in a wet shirt? Sorry, I'm having a moment here. Jane Austen, thank you so much for Pride and Prejudice, because that's made my day. Anyway, right, hot flash going. Going back to Jane Austen then. So her book is worthy. And if you think about it, it's not just the original book either. There have been spin-offs as well about Pride and Prejudice. I think I've read 4 in total. And there have been spin-offs as well on television. There was Lost in Austen a few years ago, which was great fun to watch. So yes, it has had a huge impact. And there is a lovely quote that I'm going to read for you now, which is a bit of a play on words, which those Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice fans will appreciate. Pride and Prejudice is so famous, but in fact its first line is so well known, it's actually become quite a bit of a cliche. It is a truth universally acknowledged that Pride and Prejudice is the nation's favourite novel. So now that I've talked about 2 people in a bit more detail, I'm going to hand over to Andrew, because he was doing some research for me about worthy people, and he's going to share with you some information that he found out, and I will speak to you a little bit later.
When Nikki was first asked to do this blog, she asked me to do some research. So I started off, and people would give me a number of good websites to look at. The problem that I found was that you can identify quite a lot of women who are childless not by choice, and Nikki has given you a couple of examples of that. However, trying to find men who are childless not by choice is actually quite difficult, because most men, and I'm being a man, will not easily openly say that they are sterile or have infertility problems. And also, if you look historically, a lot of men didn't get married, so there is no record of them having children. The fact that they might have dallied somewhere and might have children that they didn't know about is another matter. So it's actually very difficult. And looking in more recent times, there were a couple of examples. Unfortunately, they've both gone and had children in the last year. Prime examples being Jeff Goldblum and George Clooney. So it's actually difficult to identify men specifically rather than women. Anyway, just as a quick dalliance into people who are worthy, we have, the Florence Nightingales of the world. We have Rosa Parks, the black activist. She was married for, quite a few years, 40 or 50, I believe, maybe longer. And you then have men. Beethoven didn't have any children. Neither did Thomas Jefferson. Neither did Louis Armstrong. Now, we don't know whether they were well, we believe that they weren't homosexual, and that they had happy relationships. So why didn't they have children? We don't know. Unfortunately, there is no historical evidence to tell us why they didn't have them. Anyway, that's a bit on research, and at the bottom of this blog you will find some links to some interesting lists and articles on people who are childless, not necessarily not by choice. One of the interesting links will take you to a story about a woman in India who was childless and ended up planting hundreds of trees in I suppose, to make up for the fact that she didn't have any children. And there's now quite a big forest because of her.
I am worthy.
I am worthy.
We are worthy.